Well, I've got the cut side up there in case you're wondering, and I'm just looking to see, wow, that did a pretty good job already. Still got a teeny amount, but man, we're talking very small. Better than I thought by a long shot. Wow, it looks pretty good. I'm kind of impressed. That it worked out as well as it did. I don't know if you can see, thick here down to just about nothing here. All right, let's just lay it on the mandolin just to see what we got. Well, I'm only holding it on here, and that's difficult to gauge anything by, to be perfectly honest with you. But based on what I'm seeing, I'm liking it. It looks real good. It's good and flat as I look down it. I'm looking down it just for, to see that the frets are flat, that they're in the same plane and they look good. I don't see a real issue there. Looks real good. And the height that we came up looks pretty good to me, at least right now it does. It's going to be difficult to know whether we've got this exactly right or not. I'm going to try to set up a jig here on the table, and I'll bring you back when I get that set up. This would be kind of my standard way to gauge the height. Okay, let's just take a look at the contraption I have here on the table. I just got a flat piece of plywood, nothing special about that, 3/4 inch thick. I've got a cutout here where the scroll of the mandolin will lay. I've got pencil lines drawn on here that I'm sure you cannot see that the neck lays in. I've dished out a space here because there's often kind of a hump in this area. At least I've run into that on some mandolins. And anyway, so there's nothing interfering. It's flat across here to this spot right here. I have a line drawn across here about where the front of the bridge goes roughly. Actually, that's just rough. The critical part is this dished out little piece of wood that I have here, and it's actually thinner on this side than it is on this side, so that it contours to the mandolin top. So I lay that right there in the center on that line. Then I lay the mandolin here. Now keep in mind we don't have the wedge here right now, and I can already tell the mandolin's hitting on this side, and it's not, you can see it rocking there, and that's the neck angle. That's the rock from the neck angle. So, but I can also see, and I'm just talking out loud, about right where the body joins this, we probably have a little more, about 1/8 of an inch. So I probably should have done this first, to be perfectly honest with you. I probably should have, but I didn't. I just went by trial and error experience. Now we're going to lay our wedge in here and see if that makes any difference at all. That doesn't look too bad. I'd say, if anything, probably should have made it a little bit thicker if I really wanted to get it to the angle that I typically use. I use this so I set the neck to the appropriate angle to the body so that the strings will be the right height off of the top. You can get them way too high, you can get them way too low, and either way it's not good. You want them about the right height. And is there an exact measurement for that? No, I don't have an exact measurement. I've been using this trial and error for years until I got it perfected where I wanted it. And that's where it's at right now. So, what I'm going to do is to try to judge what size wedge I need for this mandolin. Is I'm going to try to use this to give me an idea of how thick of a wedge we need. The way my camera's mounted, I know you can't see this, and I'm sorry, but what I'm doing is I'm taking this wedge and I'm sliding it between the plywood board and the floority end of the fretboard extension. And what I'm doing, I'm just going to slide it out there on the end of that extension, and then I'm going to let this stop where it touches that. If I can measure the thickness of where that wedge touches right there, then I'll know how thick the long length of the wedge needs to be. I'm going to try to see if I can stick a pencil under there and mark it. And I think I can. Alright, I'm going to get under here and try to mark this wedge right where the Florida extension is contacting it. Okay, I was able to mark that. You can see right here is where the extension was contacting it. Now I can measure this and I'll know how thick the wedge needs to be. All right, so let's just do this right there. The wedge needs to be 170 thousandths. Yep, right on the money, 170 thousandths. Okay, well, now we've got our work cut out for us. We know exactly what we need to do. I've roughed this piece of wood out to size already, to just be, slightly bigger than what I need, okay? And it's already, this is what's freaky weird, it's already 170 thousandths thick, as you can see there. It's maybe actually just, a couple of thousandths thicker. Right at 170 thousandths there is what it shows. So anyway, the point being, that's kind of freaky. So this side is rough, so this is the side we're going to cut, and that means I'm going to glue this side here. I'm going to glue this. I made a little stick, and this is also 170 thousandths thick right here. As you can see, it matches that almost exactly. And I'm going to glue that right here, and this is what is going to make our wedge for us. So here we go. Let me get that glued on. I'm going to use super glue to do that. Just going to glue it across here. Fine, real thin line of super glue. Don't need much, but I want it all the way across there because I do not want this to come loose during this sawing operation on the bandsaw. So I'm going to hold it there. I'm going to go ahead, because I'm in a hurry, I'm going to spritz it with the accelerator so that it'll dry really fast, because nobody got time for that to dry. And now we'll go to the bandsaw and I'll show you how we cut this wedge. Okay, we're at the bandsaw. The air conditioning's running, so hopefully you can hear me. Since this is already 170 thousandths, I want the blade to start cutting almost immediately right there, but not quite cutting. So I'm going to just bump this over just a hair. I'm going to call that good. I think that's it. Now the trick of this, while I am sawing this, is the wood is not touching the fence right here in the middle or all the way down here. It's only touching it on this little wedge thing that I put in here, and it's touching it on this end. So I only want to make contact on these two ends. If I make contact here, I'll bend it in the middle and the saw will saw a crooked line. Now this only works if this bandsaw blade is sharp, and this is maple, which is hard to saw anyway, so no telling. There's a lot of room for failure here, but we'll see what we can do. There you have it, almost a near perfect wedge. A little bit of bumping going on in there we can sand out, I think, but I think almost perfect. We'll see what happens. Well, I thought I had that on camera. By the way, the air conditioner's running. I'm sorry about the noise. But anyway, I trying to sand out the saw marks in the wedge, and I'm testing it with a good straight edge here to make sure that it's good and flat. It's pretty darn flat. I'd say there's a tiny amount of underbow, and we're just trying to get rid of some of that underbow, but it's so small that it's almost not measurable. Okay, we've got the neck jig set back up here. I'm laying the wedge in the spot where the neck will be. I've got the bridge height wedge right here, and it's set in place. Now, we still aren't going to have the sideways angle fixed, but hopefully the length angle down the length is about right. I want the top to sit in here, and based on what I'm seeing, the wedge fills it up pretty darn good. I'd say, if anything, the wedge is a hair thin, but I'm talking just, maybe 10/1000ths of an inch thin, which is, I don't know what that is in millimeters, but I would say definitely less than a millimeter. So it might be a hair thin, but you can only do so much here, and I think we're in the ballpark for sure. Definitely way better than it was. Now what I have to do is determine how much of a compound angle we have to put on this wedge, and that's the tricky part. When building instruments, folks, sometimes you just don't measure. You just can't measure very good. Sometimes you just gotta use your eye. And that's kind of where I'm at here. It's very difficult to try to decide what kind of a compound angle we got to go across here. Again, let's just show you again one more time what we're dealing with. Once again, it's way lower. It angles this way. I'm exaggerating it, but it's lower on this side than it is on this side. So what I'm going to do is try to hold this all in place here. And to help myself out, I think I'm going to go ahead and just stick a couple of these quick clamps on here just so I don't have to try to hold the wedge and all that kind of thing too at the same time. I've got the wedge held on here approximately in the center. Now I'm going to eyeball this and just see what looks level to my eye. And that's about as good as it's going to get on this. I don't see how I can get it any more level than level to my eye at this point. And I think I've got a pretty good eye, so I think I'm doing all right. It looks to me like it's about a 1/16 of an inch to get it to go level. And maybe less than that even. It's difficult to say on this. It really is. There's some things you can measure easily, and other things you just can't measure very easily. I think what I'll try to do, just for the sake of sanity, as a sanity check, is to try to level both edges of this mandolin to the table. Get them and stationary and level. Then I'll lay this on here and put a level on this and measure it, and that'll just be kind of a sanity check. Right now I'm saying it's about a 1/16 of an inch that we need to taper this wedge. But I could be off, and I would like to have a secondary, more accurate way of measuring it. So here we're going to give that a try. Okay, I think you can see here I've got that pretty level across there. Now I'm going to move to here, and you can see instantly the bubble goes to the one side. So we raise it up until we get it level, and it's not much of a wedge. I'd say 1/16 of an inch is going to be plenty, if not too much. So let me see if there's any way I can measure this. And I don't know how I can, to be honest with you. We'll try the wedge method again. Alright, I've got it. I'll put a wedge under there where it's just about level. And really, it's just about level right on the tip end of that wedge. So it's not much. 50 thousandths. Which is a little less than a 1/16 of an inch. So I'm measuring 50 thousandths of an inch off the tip end of that, which is just about where it was. So roughly 50 thousandths. If we can take 50 thousandths off of the high edge to nothing, we're doing pretty good. And this is the high edge. So we've got to go from here to nothing, from 50 thousandths to nothing. Now the thing is, how do I come up with a creative way to do that and do it accurately? Just so I wouldn't make the ultimate screw up and try to cut the wedge on the wrong side somehow or something, I also just penciled, just drew some pencil scribbles down through here, so I know this is the side I want to take it off on, and it'll go from here to nothing across this. I'm not sure how I'm going to do that. It's kind of a tricky deal because you've got a wedge already, and the ideal thing is to go, you really want the whole wedge to be flat across this way too. And so that means we're going to basically go down to almost nothing here. Maybe it's even going to look like this. Maybe it's even going to be slightly tapered across here when we're done. I'm not really sure. You got to give it some thought and decide how I'm going to do it, though, because it's a very important angle to get right. Well, I took a break and went to lunch after making this wedge for this mandolin, and decided at lunch while thinking about it that I'm not happy with this, even though it's absolutely, near perfect for the angle of the neck for up and down. It's near perfect. But it's not going to satisfy me on the tilt back and forth this way. And the reason it's not is because I got to take 50 thousandths off of this whole one side. Well, if I do that, obviously there won't be anything left on this side. And it needs to be one full wedge under the fingerboard in order for the fingerboard to sit perfectly flat. You know, you could sort of make this work, and some people would argue that this would work, but it's not going to satisfy me, and I'm going to just do it over. Now that you know, so much of this kind of work is trial and error. So I've tried this and erred, and now I'm going to try it again, and I think I know exactly what I have to do differently. In other words, I have to leave it from basically 0 here to 50 thousandths here, and from 0 here to 170 thousandths here, if that makes any sense. So this one corner and one side is, well, actually that's not true. It's this corner and this corner are at full size. This is going to be 50 thousandths, and this corner down here will be 170 thousandths. This will be 50 thousandths less. This will be 50 thousandths. I'm confused. No, this will be 0. This will be... All right. The way this will end up, at least in my little minor brain here, is it'll be 50 thousandths thick on this corner down here. Now, keep in mind, this is the treble side from my perspective here. So this down here is the treble side. So it'll be 50 thousandths thick here. It'll be 170 thousandths thick here. It'll be almost 0 here. I mean, it'll be just basically thin to nothing, basically here in this corner, to 120 thousandths here. That's the way it needs to end up. So it's a compound angle. Boy, that's easy to think about. Here we go. Well, I got to be honest, this has scrambled my brain beyond belief. You know how you can overthink things? Well, I'm overthinking this for sure. But I think I've got it set up to work. The problem is when I thought I was setting it up a certain way, and actually turns out I'm setting it up 180 degree upside down backwards, you know, one of those kind of deals. But anyway, I think it will work because I can flip it and turn it based on everything I've thought about, and it should work. So here's what I've got. Got a blank piece of wood, which is far thicker than I need. It's about the right length. I put instead this time of just being 170 all the way across, I put 220 here, which is 50 thousandths thicker, down to 170. So this will hold it out, that'll cut the compound angle, and over here, so that I'll be left with 0 here, and, well, actually the 0 is going to be over here, whatever. But anyway, this is holding it out 50 thousandths also. So on the thick side of on the treble, that'll be 50 thousandths when we end up. This will be 170. This will be 120. And this will be nothing. So that's the goal. Just hang with me. Let's go cut it. If I have to do it a third time, we'll just do it a third time. Okay, I have it here. I have the little 50 thousandths here. I have this set at 170 thousandths, so it'll take off, down to 150 on this side, 170 on this side will be what will be left, and then it should work out even back here based on that wedge I put in here. It is just a little bit tippy here. I was hoping it would lay flat, but it's just a tiny bit tippy, and I guess that's because the wood might be twisted slightly. So that's not good, but I'll just have to try to hold it the best I can. Here we go. I got it pretty close. I don't think it's perfect, but it's pretty close. That part there bothers me a little bit. Kind of wish that wouldn't have happened, but I just should have had the fence that way another few thousandths. Probably another 50 thousandths. So I didn't think about that, but well, we've got our compound taper going on. It looks pretty good, except that I bet we'll have to do it a third time. I was worried that this new wedge would not work, but I do think it will now. Now granted, it runs out right here. It runs out and goes here, but I swear to you, I promise you, you can't even feel where it runs out. It's so thin. I mean, it's absolutely down to nothing. And I put a straight edge across there, and you really can't even see any light. There's just the teeniest amount of light. I'm talking like a hair. So that amount of light didn't bother me at all because it's just minute. And if I thought it would be a problem with setup, I'd just do it again, but it won't be a problem with setup. It's by far flatter than it came from the factory because when it came from the factory, as you know, they had that big underbow in there. So it's very good. I've got a straight edge on it now, and it looks good just sitting there. The two things is it at the right angle for this, which I believe it is, although it's going to be a little tough to tell. And it definitely is the right angle this way now. I have looked at it several different directions, and it looks completely flat to the body now. It looks real good to the body. I would say it's got to be within a 32nd of an inch. I mean, it's got to be that close. It's really good to the body now. And that wedge should be good too, because we're down from nothing to 170 thousandths, which is what we needed before. And so that should work. Although I didn't actually measure the final product, I'm pretty sure we've got 170 thousandths here. Yeah, we've actually got 174 thousandths, so that should be just about perfect. So the only thing I'm going to do now is make sure that the saw marks are flat. So I may do a little bit more sanding on the saw side here and just make sure it's good and flat. Then we're going to glue it in place. Okay, I think I can just show you one more time. Here is the compound angle, much thicker on this side, down to thin. You know, obviously it's thinner here and then real thin down here, thicker here and then real thin down here. So it is definitely a compound angle. It is definitely the angles that this mandolin needs. And we are about to cut it to fit this and get her glued in place. I think I might glue it to the fretboard first because I can fit it to the fretboard better than I can fit it to this neck. Okay, that makes it perfectly smooth on the long side of the fretboard here. And what I'm going to do is lay it right on that edge where I don't have to cut this edge. It'll be perfectly smooth with the fretboard itself. Then I'll just trace the rest of it that has to be cut. Okay, we've got her traced out there, and we're going to go cut that now and bring it right to the line, just barely leave the line. I've got the wedge cut to fit the fretboard, and it's just a hair proud all the way around. So I'm going to leave it that way, glue it in place, and then we'll hand file it down to the final dimensions. Hand file it, maybe even a little sanding. The way I'm going to do this is I'm going to apply glue to this piece here and to this piece here, and I'm going to spread it around with a brush. I want it as thin as possible, but I want full coverage. I don't want a lot of squeeze out. I just want full coverage without much squeeze out. I'm going to lay a piece of paper underneath this exposed corner here, just so it doesn't stick down to my table. Just making sure there's a little bit exposed all the way around, and it looks like there is. Now we're going to go get the C-clamps and start putting leather and C-clamps on top of this, and we should be good. This is what she looks like all glued up, glued to a real hard flat table, and so that'll keep the fretboard good and flat, glued to the wedge. And so she's clamped up really good. I didn't want any air pockets anywhere in the wedge. I wanted it squeezed out really, really good. So I think having a clamp there about roughly 1 per inch, we're doing pretty good. Actually, it's a little more than an inch, but not bad. I'm going to let that set overnight, and we'll get back to it. We've now got the wedge glued to the fretboard. It turned out real good. What I did was I also just sanded it flat across here, which kind of beveled this corner just a little bit and kept it good and level to the rest of this wedge. Now this wedge is just slightly proud of the plastic binding. What I'm going to do is put it in a vise here. I've got this wide woodworking vise, which is very handy for such things. And I'm just going to leave it sticking up proud of the vise here a little bit. And I'm going to take these files and I'm just going to file off the rest of that wood up to the plastic. And the goal is to get it where you can't feel the seam and hopefully even not see it too much. You know, I would rather not see a glue line is what I'm saying. Now I'm going to use a draw filing technique to smooth it out even more. Gets rid of any little filing marks. That's pretty good. We can clean it up some more once it's on the mandolin. I'm going to work on the floor to end here. Get me a round file for that, or the half round file. I believe that's got it. It's real nice and smooth. I think we can dye that and make it blend right into what's underneath it, and shouldn't be much of a problem at all. Before we put the fretboard back on the neck, the customer asked for new frets also. These frets are a little filed down. They're not too bad, but you know, now's a good time to do it because it's off the instrument and it's very easy to do now. So we will soak this down pretty good to soften the wood before we pull out the old frets, and then we'll pull them out and replace them. Now that I've got this all apart, I'm going to lightly sand the whole fretboard. And I'm just saying lightly. I'm not trying to really change any thickness here. Just getting rid of any imperfections. I'll just take an X-Acto knife and go through here and especially clean out the very ends. Okay, now we'll begin the task of cutting the frets and putting them back in here. I'm giving it one last look before we glue this up permanently back to the neck. I've got the old nut sitting here to kind of give me a gauge as to how far up the fretboard needs to go there. And just looking at everything, I've double checked the level across this way, and it seems to be just absolutely perfect. You know, as best I can tell anyway, it really looks level. Looks much more level than it ever did. The angle going this way looks pretty darn good to me too. I am going to just set a bridge here just to kind of see about you know, the angle there before we commit ourselves. I've got this bridge adjusted up a little bit to about where I expect it needs to be, and it looks, boy, like we're just about to touch it there, so that That's pretty good. I think we're in pretty good shape. I mean, like we're just about touching it there, and this was, I just adjusted it by eye. I just about where I thought it ought to be. So, and it doesn't look like it's going to be any crazy high or anything like that. Let me get a regular saddle put on here. The saddle that's on here has been modified because of such a low bridge height before. So let me put my regular saddle on here and see how it looks. This is one of the regular saddles. It has not been finished. It's just rough sawing right at the moment. So that's okay, though. It'll still give us our look and feel just to see about where it's going to be. And you know, based on that, we're about and I've got it all the way down right now. We're about a 1/16 of an inch above it or less. It's almost touching it. So let's raise it up here to what looks like a reasonable height and see how it lays on there then. It's just touching it now. Well, I'm a little concerned. I'm afraid that we might be going a little too high. I don't want to get it crazy high back here. But I think we're going to be on the high side, which puts more pressure on the top, which is a good thing. I just don't want to go crazy high. If you get them way too high, then it starts to sound like you're playing in a barrel. I think what I'm going to do is, just for safety's sake, and it could use a little trimming anyway, and it won't hurt this a little bit to get a little bit of sanding. I'm going to lay this on the belt sander and just lightly, you know, rub it out like this. I'm not going to try to take much off of it. Just more or less to level it out good, get rid of some of these saw marks, and maybe just to blend this just a tiny bit more. I don't even want to blend this very much, just a little bit. And I think that'll be enough to help make sure that this is good. Another thing I'll do is I'll double check this. It all looks real good and flat now, but maybe we could take just a little bit of sanding back in this area to make sure that we don't get it too high. Just don't want to get it too high.